Okay, actually. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. It's an honor for me to be back in Australia. I actually lived here for a year. I went to school at the University of Adelaide, and this is the first time that I've been back, and it's just been really lovely to come and share this time with all of you. I want to thank Mark Stone especially for his vision in bringing this conference together, and John Sr. for carrying out that vision and bringing so many interesting stories and minds together in one place. So thanks a lot. I actually learned to dive in Australia for the first time, and so for me personally to come back to where I discovered the ocean, to talk about the importance of the ocean to our health and our lives is personally very profound for me, so thank you for that. And thanks in advance. I'm going diving this afternoon, so there's someone's organizing some dive time for me, so I really appreciate that. My job this morning is to talk to you about how our health depends on a healthy ocean. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about the role of communication and how we talk about and engage with the public on these issues that we've all been grappling with over the last couple of days. And that communication is really one of the central questions that I've struggled with in my work. How do we take rigorous scientific findings about the natural world and translate that into, for the public, in a way that will inspire them to take care and conserve the natural world? And for me, personally, the most compelling and most profound argument that I have heard is that it is because our health absolutely and utterly depends on the natural world, and that's why we're here talking about these issues today. This argument that we depend on the natural world for our well-being transcends other challenges to social change issues. So it doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't matter your cultural background, your religious beliefs, your political ideologies. Everyone, everywhere, cares about their health and the health of their children. So for me, that is the work of the center. We take a range of issues, lots of biodiversity, climate change, ocean issues, food issues, and we try to help people understand the human health connections and dependence upon our living systems. And Richard Louv said it yesterday, that this, ultimately, the work of the center and others in this room, I know, is to help people understand that we are not separate from nature, as Richard said yesterday, that we are absolutely and utterly dependent upon it. So I'm going to give you an example of a terrestrial example, and this is featuring work by our director, Eric Shivian, and Aaron Bernstein, who's also here from our center, and he'll be speaking about how the loss of biodiversity affects human health later on this week. This is a photograph of women who are hand-pollinating apple blossoms on the Tibetan plateau. And they're doing that because the bees in that area have been driven to extinction because of the overuse of pesticides. So it takes about 20 to 25 people to pollinate 100 trees, an orchard with 100 trees. And that's usually the job that's done by two beehives. So we absolutely depend on our natural systems, and I think that photograph shows what happens when we destroy those natural systems. But today I'm going to talk about ocean issues. And when we talk about healthy ocean and healthy humans, I'm talking about how our health depends on the ocean overall. Of course, coastal parks are an incredible place where we can experience directly the ocean, and marine protected areas are an integral part of our conservation strategy. But our work focuses on, a lot of my work, it actually tries to convince people that don't have direct access to the ocean, that their lives depend on the ocean on a daily basis, and that their actions affect the ocean. So we talk about how the oceans nourish us, how the oceans heal us, and how the oceans sustain us. So the oceans nourish us, obviously, the important role of seafood in the global diet. Seafood is the most sourced animal-based protein in the world, more than pork, more than poultry, more than beef. And about 1 billion of us depend on seafood for their only source of protein. It's an incredibly healthy source of protein. It's usually very lean, and it's high in omega-3 fatty acids, which I'm sure you've heard of. These omega-3 fatty acids are incredibly beneficial for cardioprotective value and even help neurological So neurological functioning, so all this stuff about fish being brain food is actually coming out in some studies. So really healthy source of protein, but of course we're overfishing and really stressing the system and depleting that stock of healthy protein. We have gone through about a third of all of our fishery stocks in the open ocean, and some scientists think that by the year 2050 we'll go through the rest. So essentially in 40 years from now, we won't have wild-caught open ocean fish in our menu, in our diet anymore. It's really astounding, maybe in my lifetime, certainly in my daughter's lifetime. And I want to say, too, that overfishing, it's not just taking the fish out, it's the loss of biodiversity that helps, that contributes to the fish not being able to maintain healthy numbers. And so that's why marine protected areas are so important, because you need that whole system to help create an abundant source of the fisheries we're taking out and to try to achieve some sustainable take. So it's about preserving the whole system and not just that we're taking too much fish out. Of course, we're also contaminating the fish. This is a schematic of mercury. A lot of mercury comes from coal-burning power plants. It goes up into the atmosphere, it rains down in the ocean, gets taken up by plankton, and climbs up a food chain. And at the end of that food chain, many times, is one of us. Or even more profoundly, it's a nursing child or a fetus. And if it's contaminated with mercury, for instance, there's evidence that there's potential neurological damage that can happen with too much mercury intake. And the young children and developing fetuses are at a very vulnerable age for toxins and neurological development. This is a graph by Philippe Grandjean, a colleague of mine at the School of Public Health, and he studies populations up in the Faroe Islands who eat a great deal of seafood and have very high levels of mercury. This is a standard developmental test, and it's measuring the amount of time it takes for an auditory signal to register in the brain. So you can just see the higher the mercury concentration, the slower that signal takes to register. And there's other studies that show similar results in terms of neurology. I put this slide up here because I wanted to give you some practical advice about seafood. Many of you have seen the sustainable seafood cards. I forgot to bring one with me. And I actually, I'm sure there's some Australian ones, but there's a number in the United States where you can kind of educate yourself about which purchases are more sustainable than others. And they're helpful, but they don't get at all of the issues that we're talking about today in terms of health and seafood consumption. So it doesn't talk about contamination a lot of times, and it doesn't talk about levels of omega-3 fatty acids. I put the pyramid up here because this pyramid is out of the School of Public Health at Harvard, and I call it the progressive food pyramid. It's got red wine and exercise and portion control, things that are like a little bit beyond the regular standard food pyramid you sometimes see. Because there's some really interesting work that's being done now at the National Geographic where they're taking a pyramid like this and developing one just for seafood to help, again, this is a communication tool to help people understand that there's some seafood we can eat 2 to 3 times a week, which is a current recommendation from the American Heart Association, for example. But other food that is not sustainably sourced or is high in contaminants, we should eat only very occasionally. So at that bottom ring should be things like sardines and anchovies, those small oily fish where stocks are still healthy and they're really high in omega-3, and because they're short-lived, they don't accumulate toxins as much as the larger fish. So up in that special, every once in a while, tip of the pyramid is tuna, for example. So just an interesting new development that's happening.